Perfect.
It's recorded. Okay.
Cool. Well, Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
Of course.
I wanted to start by asking about enrollment. You've said in the past that your administration's approach to raising enrollment is rooted in continuous improvement across multiple areas. What are some tangible changes you'll be making to incentivize prospective students?
Well, one, listen to what current students are experiencing and where we're not performing particularly well, right? So, I mean, simple examples are dining and parking. And I say those because I've heard more about dining and parking than anything else from students. But we immediately started making changes to parking regulations, which we now have under our control. I met with Chartwell's leadership so that we can change the dining program. And that's what's really important from my perspective, is just us constantly being responsive. The fact is that a student audience is constantly changing. It is a consumer audience that refreshes itself every semester. It doesn't refresh itself every year or 4 years. It refreshes itself every semester, because any student who starts here, whether they're first time in college, transfer, graduate student, they have an experience. Well, by the time they finish that first year, they're in a different place than they were when they started. So we constantly have to be getting feedback and become an institution that is more flexible so that we can just adjust to changing needs and expectations. Additionally, there's a lot of work on process and policy. We probably have way too much policy at Eastern Michigan University, but we certainly have processes that have steps in them that are not conducive to an intuitive end user experience. So a lot of the steps that you might experience as a student when you, I don't care whether it's registering for courses or paying a bill or filling out an application, whatever it is, we have to have the exact minimum number of steps and make sure that that interface is as easy to navigate as possible. A lot of those things stand in our way right now. So when we talk about enrollment, we can't just talk about one thing. You have to talk about everything. And you have to talk about it, from my perspective, from the way in which the end user is experiencing it or receiving it. That goes for our academic experiences, our athletic experiences, our student experiences in every dimension.
And you mentioned the recent buyback of parking. In recent years, EMU had privatized a number of services. How do you feel that buying back parking has gone so far, and would you support the university buying back other services?
I can't answer the second question because it's day 29. So we're still looking at those types of things. We don't have anything else that looks like parking. In terms of the type of service model that it's in. Parking was a very unique, rigid thing. I was not here for any of that. I started as president after that buyback had already occurred. I am a big believer in flexibility and responsiveness. So if we can be both flexible and responsive to the end user and have a service agreement, okay, if everybody can win. If not, then we have to have a conversation about that. In terms of parking, I'm very optimistic because we're in control of parking now, and we're going to redo that program so that it's really focused on how students and other end users want to experience it. Because bear in mind, we're a public university. So while the students who are currently enrolled are our primary audience, we still have lots of alumni and visitors and all kinds of people who are coming to campus all the time. Well, that's an end user experience too. We want to make sure we get that right. We can't just get some of it right. And having control over all of those levers probably puts us in the best position possible to be successful.
And speaking of enrollment, in recent years it's declined, of course not during your administration, but over 40%. And this is not an issue that's exclusive to us either. Central Michigan, for example, just announced another round of budget cuts in light of their own issues. Are budget cuts something that's on the table at EMU?
Well, I think that's too simplified a conversation. Public universities in America and private universities run on a model where some of the funding is coming from the state. If we were 40 years ago, that'd be most of it. Now it's the minority by far. And what you're always trying to balance is the scope of organization has to match the scope of resources. And when you're in an enrollment decline, which I hope we will be able to stem, you have to adjust the size and scope of the institution in every dimension, because it can't just be those who are demanding its having an experience there. I'm looking at everything right now, but the goal is we have to match the resources available with the scope of the organization, ensuring all the time that we're offering the highest quality experience for students that we possibly can, and one that is customized around their needs and expectations rather than copying what somebody else might think is important. It's a really complex environment right now. Federal government's made dramatic changes over the last year and a half, and those are not new. I mean, that's not just, federal government's been making changes to higher ed policies and resources that have been informing how we operate for a number of years. Our landscape is changing for higher education right now, and that's not new either. That's a conversation that's been occurring for a long time, and those changes have been coming for a long time. Universities have just been slow to accept them. So we're going through a time of real transformation. But if we stay focused on what the most important work that we do is, and that is filling the toolboxes of students, so regardless of what level they're studying at, they get to go out into the next chapters, not just chapters of their life, with skills, abilities, knowledge, and ways of solving problems and navigating the world that will ensure their success, again, in multiple dimensions of their life. If we're focused on that and we can get that right, then the size and scope of organization is a secondary thing, right? Because if I'm a student, that's the thing I'm most focused on.
You've also said in the past that your administration is working with legislators to influence policy and protect EMU's interests. What are some of the issues that come up that you're advocating for in those conversations?
One, any financial support that they can offer on areas where the interests of the state or the nation converge with the interests of Eastern Michigan. Two, trying to protect funding streams. I serve on the board of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities in Washington, D.C. In that context, we advocate for federal higher ed policy and protections because most of the scaffold for American public higher education, from an economic perspective, runs through the federal government. So they are a key partner. I'll give you an example. Right now, there's a large debate around funding for Pell Grants, because Pell Grant funding has an overspending in the federal budget. Well, people have a lot of opinions about that. When I say people, I mean people who serve in the United States Congress or occupy the White House. We have to be part of that conversation. We're not going to make the decision on what happens, but we do want to be part of that conversation because that has real impacts on students, not just at Eastern Michigan, but all over the country. It has real impacts on communities and employers and the types of talent pipelines that they have available to them. So it's important for us to be true partners with our delegates who are in Washington, D.C. If they're representing Michigan, we want them to act on our behalf. But being part of a national conversation is a critical part of our job right now. And that is complicated. And bear in mind, I'm a president in a sea of other institutions that are also trying to represent their own interests, the interests of their states, and those are differing interests sometimes. So we're building coalitions around that too.
How do you plan to handle contract negotiations with the faculty union?
The same way I've done that for many years at another university. I was obviously on faculty at Eastern Michigan. The same way that you hopefully handle any negotiation. You're going in and trying to create the best terms and conditions for employment that are that make sense for the university, that make sense for the people we're in service to, and that make sense for employees who are serving the university. That's a conversation, and it needs to be an ongoing conversation. It's not just one thing. It's there's a lot of dimensions that come along with that, and having the opportunity to sit at the table and have meaningful and I hope very productive discussions around that is probably a pretty good approach to solving that problem.
What was the reason for Rhonda Longworth stepping out of the provost role?
Well, we had a new presidential administration. One of the key goals that was listed in the leadership profile for the new president was making certain that we had a highly accountable, high-performing leadership team. And generally speaking, when you come into presidential administrations, there's going to be change in leadership, especially after an administration that lasted as long as President Smith's. That's a pretty natural, common component of that transition. As we go through the coming months, there'll be other transitions, both in how we're organized and who's in service to the university, because the goals that are set for this institution are set by the Board of Regents. And when they set those goals, we have to make sure that we put the right team on the field to achieve those goals.
How do you strike the balance between the agenda of the board and your own agenda as president?
Those things can't be in an imbalance. All of the authority of the president of the university is derived from the Board of Regents. All of the Board of Regents' authority is derived from the appointment that the governor gives them. And the governor's authority is derived from the Constitution of the state of Michigan. So we don't get to have competing agendas, because if we do, then we'll have a brand new presidential search. I can assure you they can solve that problem pretty easily.
Sure. What are your specific plans for tuition pricing over the next 4 years?
Oh, we're looking at that really closely. Yeah, I'm particularly sensitive to how we price higher education. I'm very sensitive to what the steps that EMU has taken. We're in a hyper-competitive marketplace. It's really important for us to look at that. Again, day 29, I do not have a full plan in place on that front. But it is an area that we're going to be looking closely at. And that's not just tuition and fees. It's how those are received. It's the timing of them. It's the sequencing of scholarship. We've got to maximize our ability to put the right packages together for students. And every student's different. So we don't want to do those in like buckets. You really want to do those customized around the individual student to make an experience at EMU as accessible as possible.
You've mentioned in the past that AI should be a case-by-case issue in terms of how it's used in our classrooms based on the issue that's being approached. And do you plan to implement a university-wide AI policy?
We were just talking about this. It's a great question. I went to a national conference a couple of years ago, where we had a lot of presidents there and a lot of administrations from all over the country. We were taking on this issue. We had some AI experts there, both from industry and those who had been working on these issues at a number of universities. We don't know enough about the technology to offer a directive policy. But we do have to have guidelines that are informed by best practice. Now, best practice related to AI that's going to be an ongoing conversation. So yes, I do think we need guidelines as a university. But probably more importantly, we need a constant conversation about how are these tools influencing direct instruction? How can they be used to enhance direct instruction or enhance learning and productivity? I would add into that realm, how are these tools being used to enhance research? Where are the limits or the guardrails? I don't know that anybody has all of the answers to that question, but if we're not talking about that a lot, and as those tools emerge and evolve, we have to adjust and be flexible. So will I put out a, kind of a university-wide policy that is a yay or nay? No. Will we have to start really having some thoughtful and dynamic infrastructure around that in terms of our own behaviors and decisions? Absolutely. I think that's probably going to be true for a lot of businesses, our own personal lives, how people raise children. I mean, there's a lot of ethical implications that come along with this technology.
What are your three biggest priorities in terms of things that, at the end of your administration, what quantifiable metrics we can look back at and say, did he achieve the goals he set out with?
Yeah, we're about to go through a strategic planning process that will clarify all of that. So I would only speak about it broadly today. But broadly, we have to put Eastern Michigan University in a better position to be successful on behalf of the state of Michigan. So there's a growth component in there, sustainability components. There's a lot of things that go into that. But we have to have a stronger Eastern Michigan University.
What does that look like tangibly?
So that would be an Eastern Michigan that industries are more integrated into, so they depend on us to create talent. I mean, we're sitting in a pretty sophisticated robotics lab right now, and we have industry partners who depend on us to produce problem solvers for them. And training and education that occurs in this space is part of that. Well, we want to make certain that those employers are more integrated into that process so that we're creating the highest value for them. Because bear in mind, for them, the student is the product. Because they're coming and saying, hey, I want that talent. I want to bring that talent in my organization. So that's one of the marks. Two, growth. Certainly. We've been in a long period of decline. And when we focus on the performance of the institution, the performance of the institution's going to be based around the experience that students are having. If students are having positive experiences that create a return on investment for them, that is what informs growth. And I would add in kind of broadly an Eastern Michigan that is looked to by families, by communities, by partners, school districts, companies. If we have an Eastern Michigan that is looked to, that's a result that I think we can all be proud of. Now, those are not metrics. Metrics come out of planning, and we will have university scorecards and those types of things that really get down into the details that inform those priorities. Mm-hmm. But broadly, every behavior that we engage in, every choice we make, should be going to those goals. And if they do, I think we put ourselves in a position to be really successful moving forward in what is a very, very challenging higher education environment.
Is there anything else that we haven't gotten to today that you think would be important to share?
There's probably 600 things,
I'm sure.
But we can certainly talk again.
Sure. Well, I've got one last question,
Sure.
And it's a zinger, so get ready. Is it true that you're considering opening a campus bar?
There's discussion of that, yeah. We've had that type of amenity on other campuses. And it's something that opens up a lot of opportunities for engagement, both with alumni and other kind of special event stuff. But it also gives students a place to go. The first time I saw that was about 25 or 30 years ago. I think it was 25 years ago at Ohio State. And as it evolved, I saw how that amenity had different iterations on lots of different campuses that I've served and visited. And yeah, whatever will make an Eastern Michigan student's broadly defined experience richer and one that builds a greater positive culture, greater community, or greater connection, we're absolutely going to explore that idea. So yes, that is not off the table.
All right. Well, Dr. Kelly, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Of course.